Can love really hide secrets that deep? He said he was at work. It's the kind of question that doesn't hit you at first. Not until you're standing in the rain outside a crime scene, watching a coroner's van pull away with someone you once called your whole life inside a black bag. But by then, love is just noise in the background. And the truth? It's quietly humming underneath everything, waiting to cut through the silence. She believed him. Of course she did. When he said he was working late, she didn't question it. They'd been together for 6 years. Shared a lease, a dog, dreams of moving somewhere warm. Florida, maybe. Somewhere you don't have to wear lies like jackets in winter. But on January 12, 2022, around 3:14 a.m., something happened that split their world in two. And the only witness that never changed its story was the GPS. Started with a phone that wouldn't stop ringing. Her sister had called her 3 times. No response. Then 10. Still nothing. By 7 a.m., panic was crawling through every word the sister said to dispatch. My sister didn't come home. She always texts me when she's safe. Something's wrong. Police tried the usual. They called her boyfriend. He said he hadn't seen her since the night before, that she left angry, said something about going to her mother's place. He assumed she made it there, but the truth had already started bleeding through the cracks, because that wasn't what the GPS said. And this story, it doesn't end with a misunderstanding. It ends with blood. She was last seen wearing white, a soft sweatshirt, matching joggers, her hair tied up, barefaced, carrying a pink tote she always used when she was anxious. Filled with gum, a rosary, her inhaler. Security footage showed her leaving the apartment complex at 2:49 a.m. Alone, calm, but not heading to her mother's house. Instead, she walked toward a dimly lit side street behind the gas station. And her phone, the same phone her boyfriend said he hadn't touched, moved with hers, all the way down that alley. At 3:14 a.m., both GPS signals stopped moving. Police would later say it was the moment everything changed. Her phone died at that exact time, but his kept pinging for 10 more minutes in the same alley. Then, his GPS tracked a slow drive home, with one stop, behind an old warehouse 2 blocks away. They pulled the security cam from the corner shop across the street. It showed a silver Camry circling the lot. Then it vanished into the dark. He'd say he was hunting the next morning, that the blood in his trunk came from a deer. But no one finds deer in back alleys at 3 a.m. And no one who's innocent lies that easily. There's something gutting about hope when it's false. You start off believing this is just a scare, that she'll walk through the door, apologize for not calling, that her phone died, that there was a mix-up, that it's not what you think. But by noon that day, no one was saying that anymore. Not the family, not the police, and certainly not her phone's location history, which was now painting a story no one wanted to believe. At 10:27 a.m., officers pulled the GPS data from her smartphone using emergency authorization. No warrant needed. She was considered at risk. A woman in her 20s, last seen walking alone at night, now unresponsive for over 8 hours. The data lit up a map on the detective's screen like a time bomb. At 2:49 a.m., she left the apartment complex. By 3:12 a.m., she was stationary in an alley behind the Marathon gas station. And at 3:14 a.m., both her phone and his registered in the same 30-foot radius. For 7 full minutes. Then her phone stopped transmitting. But his signal moved. Slowly, deliberately, heading west, toward an abandoned loading dock. And then back home. The detective turned to her sister. Did she ever mention feeling unsafe around him? Arguments? Anything off? The sister hesitated. Then her voice cracked. She told me he'd been tracking her. With an app just in case, he said. I didn't think it was serious. He'd said it was for protection. But now it looked like control. Officers arrived at his apartment at 3:46 p.m. that day. They didn't have enough to arrest him. Not yet. But they needed answers. He opened the door wearing gym shorts and no shirt, like nothing was wrong. His expression, blank, neutral, too calm. She left last night, he repeated. We had an argument. She walked out. When they asked what time that was, he answered too quickly. Around 1, maybe 2. But the footage showed her leaving just before 2:50 a.m., a full hour later than his version. A detective asked if he'd left the apartment after she did. No, he replied. I went to bed. That's when they asked to see his phone. He hesitated, then handed it over. But when the text tried to load his location history, the app had been deleted. Every log, gone. Not reset, erased. But what he didn't know was that her phone still had the backup sync enabled, which meant her GPS was still paired to his profile. Everywhere he went that night, her phone tracked it, without him ever realizing. In the living room, a young officer whispered to the lead. He thinks the data's gone, but it's still on her cloud. Look, he showed her the synced records. From 3:12 to 3:19 a.m., both phones had been right beside each other for 7 minutes. Then one stopped, the other kept moving, and at 3:22 a.m., he made a brief detour. Behind the dumpster near an old row of mechanic shops. They asked if they could look in his car. He said no, so they left, but not empty-handed. They had a warrant request drafted before the sun set, and inside that car, they would find everything they needed, but not before the worst part of all, because later that night, a dog walker would call 911 and say, "There's something behind the dumpster. It smells wrong. There's always something small." That's what the officer kept saying over and over, staring at the footage like it owed him answers. "People don't just vanish," he muttered. "It's always something small that gives them away." And that small thing came at 7:42 p.m., when a woman walking her husky named Diesel stopped at the edge of a cracked sidewalk behind Westwood Tire and Lube, an alley most people avoided after dark. She said it was the smell that hit first, like burnt copper, sour rain, and something deeply wrong. She pulled the dog back, but Diesel wouldn't stop growling. That's when she saw it, a glimpse of something pale behind the dumpster. First, she thought it was a bag of clothes. Then she saw a bare foot, turned slightly inward, a toe with chipped purple polish. She dialed 911, and this time, the police raced to the scene. By 8:11 p.m., floodlights lit up the back alley, the same alley the GPS had flagged that morning. Officers approached slowly, gloves, evidence markers, breath like steam in the cold air, and then they saw her, folded behind the dumpster, face turned away, one hand curled beneath her. Her sweatshirt was soaked through, sticking to her ribs. Blood had pooled beneath her hip and trailed into the gravel. The Me on site said she'd been there no more than 18 hours. The coroner would later confirm it. Time of death, between 3:10 and 3:20 a.m. Right in the window when both phones, hers and his, were logged in the alley. Right in the window when his car had sat parked less than 10 feet away. And yet, he'd told them he never left the apartment. One officer turned to the lead and whispered, "That's her alley. That's the signal. We've got him." By 9:45 p.m., the search warrant was signed. Police returned to the apartment, but this time they weren't asking. They were taking. First stop, the silver Camry. Second stop, his bedroom. Third, the laundry room, where a trash bag sat neatly taped shut at the bottom of the bin. Inside it, a white towel with blood smears, a pair of gloves with skin cells that weren't his, and a receipt from a nearby gas station, time-stamped 3:38 a.m., minutes after her phone had died, minutes after her body was likely hidden. And the gas station? It had cameras. The footage showed him walking in, hoodie up, face half covered. He bought cleaning wipes, a lighter, and a red gas can. He didn't buy gas, just the can, which police believe was meant for something else, to burn evidence. But he never got that far. Meanwhile, forensic techs were inside his Camry, scanning every surface with luminol. They found traces of blood, not just in the trunk, but under the back seat. And inside the trunk lining, a long brown hair. Same length, same shade, same DNA. When detectives returned to confront him, he was already in the kitchen, trying to clean the stove. Again, too calm, too practiced. They told him what they'd found. They told him her body had been recovered. They asked again if he'd left the apartment. He didn't speak, didn't blink, just looked down at the sponge in his hand, and finally said, "She was never supposed to leave." He didn't cry, not when they told him her body had been found, not when they read him his rights, not even when they placed the cuffs around his wrists. The detective standing beside him swore it felt rehearsed, like he'd been expecting this moment, like he'd planned for it. Inside the interrogation room, he sat with his hands folded. Calm, too calm. He didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't demand proof. He just stared at the ceiling for 7 long minutes. And then he said, "We fought. She wanted to leave. I didn't mean to hurt her." They leaned in, not aggressive yet. "What do you mean, you didn't mean to hurt her?" "She said she was done," he replied quietly. "Said I was too controlling. Said I made her feel like a prisoner." The detective asked if that was true. He shrugged. "I just wanted to know where she was. I didn't want her disappearing. That's all." He thought the GPS tracking was love. She saw it as surveillance. But the app had tracked more than her phone. It had tracked her last living steps. He claimed she hit him first, that she shoved him in the alley, that he panicked, pushed back, and she fell, that she hit her head on the dumpster, that the blood in the trunk was from moving her body. But there was a problem with his story. Several, actually. The coroner's report found no blunt force trauma to the head. What it did find was far worse. Strangulation, defensive wounds, red abrasions on her wrists, indicating she was grabbed hard by both arms, a fingernail broken clean off, and worst of all, bruising on her neck that matched a right-handed grip. So they asked again, "Did you put your hands on her neck?" He paused, swallowed, shook his head. "No, she slipped." But science didn't lie. Neither did the fingerprints smeared across the inside of the trunk, and her hair found tangled inside the backseat buckle. His timeline was unraveling. His version of the argument didn't match the GPS timestamps. She hadn't stormed off. She never left the alley. And the only thing that moved after 3:14 a.m. was him. Police reviewed surveillance footage from that night on a wider scale. They pulled traffic cams from the nearby intersection, and there, just barely, was the silver Camry at 3:24 a.m., turning off its headlights, backing into a dead-end alley behind the mechanic shop, exactly where her body was later found. He didn't mention that part in his confession. Didn't say how long he sat there. Didn't say what he was thinking. Didn't say why he didn't call for help if it was just an accident. But the most chilling moment came when they showed him her final location ping. The detective leaned across the table. This was her last known movement. You were with her. You had a choice. And that's when he finally looked up and said, "I didn't want her to leave me. Not again. Not like the others." The room went silent, because in that moment, they realized this wasn't about one fight. It was about control, about possession, and about what happens when someone decides that love is a leash and freedom is a threat. It wasn't just the location. It was how she was left, folded into herself like an afterthought, face turned from the sky, a single sneaker still on her foot. No attempt to call for help, no goodbye, no dignity, just dumped behind a steel bin like her life, everything she'd ever been, could be thrown away that easily. The forensic photos told a story no one wanted to see. She hadn't just been placed there. She'd been dragged, across gravel, over broken glass. Her legs showed scraping wounds, uneven and shallow, like she was pulled in a rush with no care. The skin on her palms, peeled, as if she had tried to push back or hold on to something. The me said she was still breathing when it started, that the pressure to her neck lasted longer than necessary, that whoever did this wanted her silent. Inside the lab, the crime scene unit worked with what little they had. No security footage behind the dumpster, no witnesses, but inside the Camry, they struck gold. Between the trunk liner and the spare tire well, they found something overlooked in the first sweep. A hair tie, pink, stretched, with one tiny speck of dried blood stuck to it. It matched the one she wore in her last Instagram story, posted only hours before she vanished. The blood on it? Hers. Beneath the driver's seat, wedged into the carpet? Her lip gloss. She'd been carrying it in her hoodie. It didn't fall there on its own. That meant at some point she was in the front seat, likely conscious, possibly begging. The me said the pattern of bruising around her mouth suggested she'd been silenced. By force. A hand. A cloth. Or worse, intent. Detectives built a timeline down to the second. 2:49 a.m. She leaves the apartment. 3:12 a.m. Her phone stops moving in the alley. 3:14 a.m. Both GPS signals freeze. 3:19 a.m. His phone begins moving again, alone. 3:24 a.m. His Camry is caught turning off its headlights, reversing into the warehouse alley. 3:38 a.m. He's caught on camera buying cleaning supplies and a red gas can. 4:05 a.m. His GPS arrives back home. He told police she stormed off, that she left him behind. But nothing in the timeline supported that. And now, the jury would see it all. In the courtroom, his expression didn't change. Not when the prosecutor described how long she fought. Not when they showed the text she'd sent to her sister that week. I think he's spying on me, like really watching me. I don't know how to prove it. If anything happens to me, it was him. Not even when they projected her final location onto a giant map. Her blue dot frozen in that alley forever. He just sat there, arms crossed, like it didn't belong to him, like the guilt was someone else's story. But the moment that cracked the silence was when her mother took the stand. She clutched a folded photo, a shot from her daughter's 8th birthday. Ponytail, missing teeth, glitter on her cheeks. Her voice broke halfway through her statement. I told her once that love shouldn't hurt. She told me, it doesn't. Not with him. But she was wrong. She just didn't know it yet. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Not even the court reporter. And still, he showed no emotion. Until they showed the tracker logs. Time-stamped, synced to the second. His every move. Her final steps. And the prosecutor leaned in and said, this device saw everything. Even if he never tells us the truth, the GPS already did. They say blood is the loudest kind of evidence. It doesn't scream. It doesn't confess. But it lingers. And in court, silence can be a trap. Because what you don't say says everything. By the time the trial entered its second week, the prosecution had already laid out their foundation. The GPS logs, the camera footage, the blood evidence, the inconsistencies in his story. But what they revealed next changed the tone of the courtroom completely. Because it wasn't just blood in the trunk. It was her blood, mixed with another fluid they hadn't tested at first. A clear residue on the trunk liner. Turns out, it was tears, or rather high-concentration lacrimal proteins, found in mucosal secretions associated with crying and stress. She hadn't died immediately. She'd been alive and aware, long enough to know what was coming. The pathologist took the stand, calm, methodical. The bruising on her wrists is consistent with restraint. The abrasions on her knees suggest forward impact, like she was trying to crawl away. The pattern of petechiae in her eyes, classic signs of asphyxiation. The defense tried to argue she fell, that maybe it was a push, an accident, a heat-of-the-moment mistake. But the forensic pathologist was firm. The pressure on her neck was applied for no less than 15 seconds. That's not a slip. That's not a stumble. That's deliberate force. The next witness was one the public didn't expect. An ex-girlfriend. Her name was Olivia. She stepped into the witness box wearing a navy blouse, voice trembling slightly, and what she said made the courtroom fall still. He used to check my location, too, made me share my passwords. If I went anywhere without him knowing, he'd accuse me of lying. It didn't feel like love. It felt like a cage. The defense objected. Relevance, prior behavior, character assassination. But the judge allowed it, pattern of control. And Olivia's final words were unforgettable. I got out. She didn't. Back at the defendant's table, his expression began to shift. Not panic, not remorse, but something colder. He leaned over to his lawyer and whispered something. The prosecutor noticed. She waited for him to look up. And when he did, she smiled. Because what he didn't know was that they'd found something else. A deleted note in his phone's drafts folder, recovered during forensic imaging. It had no title, no recipients, never sent, just a few chilling lines. She said she was leaving. They always say that. But this time I made sure. That note was timestamped January 11th, 11:47 p.m., 3 hours before she died. The defense tried to explain it away, said it could have been lyrics, said it wasn't proof of anything, said context mattered. But the context was carved into every inch of her body, into the alley where she died, into the silence of the courtroom where her mother wept quietly in the front row. Then came the turning point. A police officer from the digital forensics unit was called to the stand. He explained how the GPS sync had worked, how her phone was still linked to his location services, and how that led them to every place he went after her phone went silent. Then he said something no one saw coming. We also found access logs from a smart speaker in the apartment. At 3:42 a.m., someone said, "Hey Google, how long does it take DNA to degrade?" The courtroom gasped. The timestamp? Just 4 minutes after the gas station trip. He wasn't cleaning out of panic. He was researching how to erase her. The prosecutor paused, then delivered the most devastating line of the trial. Ladies and gentlemen, the blood didn't lie. The GPS didn't lie. And now, even the devices he lived with are telling the truth. The silence in the courtroom wasn't just emotional. It was final. Because now the story wasn't about a man who made a mistake. It was about a man who made a choice, and prepared for it. The courtroom was silent. Not the kind of silence that feels respectful. The kind that feels heavy, suspicious. The kind that waits for something dark to crawl into the light. The prosecutor's voice was sharp when she said it. The GPS doesn't just tell us where someone was. It tells us what they were doing. When they thought no one was watching, he sat motionless at the defense table, not twitching, not sweating, just watching, like a man watching a movie he already knows the ending to. But this wasn't a movie. This was a trial for murder, and the evidence had stopped whispering. It was screaming. The jury had seen the map, the slow, quiet dots on the screen, her phone and his, walking together at 2:58 a.m., then pausing, stopping, and hers going still. They heard the 911 call from the neighbor, who heard what sounded like a woman gasping for air behind the alley dumpster. They saw the dashcam footage from the liquor store 2 blocks over, his car idling with the passenger door open, for nearly 8 minutes. And then, they saw the blood-stained hoodie, buried in the dirt behind his grandmother's old barn. His DNA, hers, fibers from the tote bag still trapped in the seams. He told the court the hoodie wasn't his, said he never saw it before. The GPS disagreed. It showed him at that barn, at 4:12 a.m., just 45 minutes after her phone went dead. No flashlight, no excuse, just 16 minutes on the property. And a 6-foot patch of soil freshly disturbed the next morning. They brought in a cadaver dog. The dog didn't hesitate. It sat right at the edge of the patch and whined. Her mother took the stand next. She didn't cry. She didn't have tears left. She just stared at the man her daughter once called the love of her life and said, "She always told me he would never hurt me. I believed her. Now I live every day knowing the person I trusted most." Taught her how to lie to herself. The defense tried everything. Blamed it on someone else. Said it was gang-related. A robbery gone wrong. The old alley was dangerous, remember? But GPS doesn't have enemies. It doesn't have emotions. It just records. And it had recorded him with her in that alley at that time. It recorded the stop at the warehouse. It recorded the drive to the barn. It recorded every second of a timeline he swore didn't exist. And the final nail? A single voicemail, recovered after the phone company unlocked her backup data. It was never sent. She must have recorded it when she felt scared. maybe thinking she'd send it later. Her voice was soft, shaking. If anything happens to me, it was Eric. He said he loved me. But tonight, he looked at me like a stranger. I don't know what I saw in his eyes, but it wasn't love. It was like I was already gone to him. The jury took 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Life without parole. He never spoke at sentencing, not even to apologize. But as he was led away in cuffs, a reporter swore she heard him whisper something under his breath. She leaned forward. He said, "They never found the phone. That phone. It's still missing. And somewhere in the darkness of that alley, or maybe behind that barn. It's still out there, quiet, dead, forgotten. But the GPS? It already told us everything we needed to know." He lied. And the tracker? Didn't. Trust isn't just broken by betrayal. Sometimes it's shattered by silence. The kind of silence that comes with too many missing pieces. And one person who won't stop hiding the truth. If someone disappears and their partner just assumes they're fine, always ask yourself, who benefits from the silence? Because sometimes the loudest confession is a path that never should have crossed hers. Comment below, did justice really win? Would you trust a GPS over a person's word? Subscribe for more real-time true crime stories, where every detail matters. Like, comment, and never stop asking the hard questions.